Now, we talked about people in the hospitals. What about the students outside who can't find a placement? What do they actually do? I believe you have an interesting story about that.
This is true. So I've recently come back to KL after a few years abroad, and about 2 months or so ago, I got into a Grab, into a taxi, a ride-hailing app.
Yeah.
And I usually have conversations with my drivers, and this one was a particularly intelligent and articulate driver. And I asked him, so what are you doing? Is this your full-time job? As an open question. And he tells me he's actually waiting to become a doctor. So he's graduated from a local public university, and I think he's done well for himself, and it's been about 10 months or so since he's graduated. But luckily for him, he would have started already. So if you're out there, I wish you good luck.
All right. They have to wait, definitely. The first year, maybe 10 to 12 months of waiting to get into the housemanship. They get into the housemanship, and maybe you can talk about what actually doctors go through during the housemanship, because it's not an easy process. Is as you can say, baptism by fire-esque type of environment. So what did you personally go through when you were a houseman?
I went through a lot of hard work.
Okay.
I'll begin there. When I say hard work, the typical work week is 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. And I was working something like 90, 100, 110 hours a week. So it's double the usual workload. We can separate hospital-based housemanship training into two. You see patients who are inpatients in the wards, and you also see clinic patients who come to you and then they go home the very same day.
Okay.
Often it's the ones in the hospital that requires more care, and therefore you have to be on call some of the time.
Okay.
And when I say some of the time, it ranges. So in a well-staffed department, you could go on call once every week. And in a poorly staffed department, sometimes you have to go on call every other day. What this means is you started your work at say 6 or 7 in the morning on the Monday. Nominally, you finish at 5 p.m. on the Monday, but you work from 5 p.m. on Monday to 8 a.m. on Tuesday. And then your work day on Tuesday continues again. So you only get to go home at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. So essentially, you're spending 36 hours in the hospital. That was what it was like back then. But right now, things have changed for good and sometimes for bad. They've moved to a shift system in most of the hospitals and most of the departments in Malaysia.
Okay.
And in the shift system, what happens is, and just different hospitals and different departments have different shift times.
Yeah.
Here's an example of what it might look like. You start at 8 in the morning, you go home at 3. And then the next shift takes over from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then there's a third shift, the overnight shift, that takes place from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next day.
So there's 3 shifts of doctors working around. Okay.
For example. And again, it depends from department to department, and hospital to hospital, and the heads of department, the pengarah hospital or hospital directors often have some say about how long the shifts are and how often you do them, and so on and so forth.
And in 2011, the government imposed a 5-year moratorium. Let's talk a bit about that. What is the moratorium? What did the moratorium consist of, and has it been extended and things like that?
Of course. The moratorium you speak of is a moratorium on medical schools. At the moment, today, Malaysia has 33 medical schools, more per capita, right? We've got a population of 32 million people. This means we have 1 medical school per million population, more than Australia, US, and UK. So we have a lot of medical schools.
Okay.
11 of them are public schools and 22 of them are private schools. And they're ranging all over Malaysia. And the private schools usually use a Ministry of Health facility to train their medical students, because all medical schools need a teaching hospital, so to speak. And some hospitals like UM is a pure teaching hospital using UMMC and so on and so forth, right? The moratorium was introduced in 2011 and then renewed in 2016, and it's a 5-year moratorium. It expires in April 2021.
Okay.
The moratorium just states that we will have no new medical schools in Malaysia because we want to address the issue of too many medical students are graduating too quickly. But interestingly, Dishen, the moratorium is on the number of medical schools. It's not on the moratorium, the number of students. So it's possible that with the 33 students, if they expand their capacity, instead of 6,000 new doctors per year, it's possible that we can get 12.
Okay, now talking about the moratorium, coming back to that, talking about the moratorium, it's about limiting the number of medical schools, correct? And do you think they should come up with something that could limit, or is there a way for them to limit the number of medical students graduating and things like that? What are your thoughts?
Well, Well, I have two thoughts actually. The first one is yes, of course, we can create a system that we can limit the number of medical students total and adjust for what our long-term national service needs are. 5 years, it takes 5 years to train a doctor.
Yeah.
So whatever you institute today, you can only see 10 years later, right? It's technically possible to do that. We can also factor in attrition. So for example, we need 1,000 doctors. We should admit 1,100 doctors because 10% of them will drop out, for example. It's very possible for us to create such a system. Whether or not we should is a separate matter. Because if you do create, and there are some arguments to create that, if you do enforce it on the general public, the enforcement issues aside, which is very challenging, we leave that aside, I'd like to talk about the issue of freedom of choice. As in, who is the government to determine what the citizens should study or not study? If I truly want to be a doctor, maybe the solution would be anybody can read medicine, anybody can graduate medicine, but then we'll put you through a new test to make sure that you're good enough. From wherever school you are, from wherever in the world you come from, we'll make sure that you're good enough. So we're respecting your freedom of choice, but the government will also institute some sort of an exam to make sure that they're of minimum standard.
Okay, so talking about that exam, doesn't it mean that if a government wants to give another exam after a medical student has graduated from the institute, is there a shout out to the medical institute saying they're not up to par and their levels are not up to there? Or is the government trying to say like, no, we are trying to standardize everything and we want to make sure that everybody has that one requirement that they need to do or they need to pass that specific exam to get into the industry and things like that?
That's a great point. And it's the second one that I think is a more important one. The government, in this case, the government of Malaysia, the Ministry of Health, together with the Ministry of Education, they really must work hand in hand to make sure that they have a coherent strategy to harmonize and to ensure the same standards of entry to become a doctor. Medicine will not be the first profession in Malaysia, to create this. The lawyers have it. They have a certificate of legal practice. You can graduate from any university in the world, Harvard, all the way to a university in Taiping, for example. I'm from Taiping, very proud of it. But my point being, it doesn't matter if you graduated from Taiping or Harvard, assuming Harvard's the best law school in the world, you have to sit for the certificate of legal practice. So lawyers do it in Malaysia, maybe doctors should consider it too. Secondly, doctors in other countries do it. The UK, for example, has got a professional licensing examination, they call it PLAB.
Okay.
To qualify to work as a doctor in the UK, you have to pass the PLAB. It doesn't matter if you qualified or rather graduated from the UK or Malaysia or Saudi Arabia. If you pass the PLAB, we consider you good enough to work and practice in the UK.